Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of my podcast Historians in Conversation, which is hosted by the University of Lodz in Poland. Today my guest is Professor Maciej Kokoszko, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Philosophy and History at the University of Lodz, and at the same time he is also the head of department for the history of Byzantium at the same faculty. In my conversation today I will be talking to Professor Kokoszko about his life in the last years of the People's Republic of Poland, and his academic career, his choices, his motivations, his love for ancient history, his choice to study Byzantium, and then also about his administrative work at the Faculty of Philosophy and History. I welcome Professor Kokoszko to my podcast, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello, Maciej. Nice to have you in my podcast. I'm very happy that you agreed to have this conversation. You are my first Polish guest. And I would like to talk to you about your life, your academic career, your love for history.
Basically, this is an honor for me just to converse with you and say something about my life. I'm not sure whether it's interesting enough for others, but of course, it might be to some extent as well. So I would be as cooperative as it is only possible.
I know that you studied in Łódź, but could you tell a little bit about your childhood? Could you tell about your family?
It was a very nice and enjoyable childhood, I would say. I had a mother and a father. Unfortunately, they passed away 3 years ago, almost. In a very short period, one from the other. This is something I can't get over. Still, but it's not the subject of our conversation. They were very, very, very loving parents. In my childhood, I also had a grandmother that largely contributed to my education and generally upbringing and forming me, saying that there is something like goodness, and the idea of good is, say, palpable. This is something real. You've got to behave in a certain way. And just remember about other people that family is very important and relations within are extremely important because they should be based on mutual love, and this mutual love is expressed by different things, like saying hello, like asking how are you doing, like preparing meals for and tidying up the place for myself and for the others, and so on and so on. And my mother was the same, and my father also the same. They came from the same region, so from Łódź. Although, their past and their families just migrated to Łódź like some generations before. Basically, people that were something to do with agriculture and then moving here. My father was working for a business or national or state, meaning that owned by the state, that dealt with something like transporting goods to the shops. You don't remember, fortunately, those days when everything was state-owned. And of course, transportation was also state-owned. My mother graduated from Polytechnic, which is the so-called technical university. She dealt first with something like building textile machines and generally with textiles, producing textiles, and then she switched to something like patenting, and she was an expert on how you should patent new innovations, and she enjoyed very much her work. I'm not so sure whether my father did the same. However, they were a very loving couple to the very end of their lives, and we kept together. So that means that, of course, I had love for them, but our relations were more of a relation of people that know and cherish and appreciate. So that means that I tried to help them, and they helped me as well. They were very interested in what I was doing. And definitely we had something like a passion for time together. So we were going together on vacation, spending much time together, going to the cinema or to the theater. And it was a very enjoyable time, I must say. So very, very good thing. As far as education, they didn't intervene. They wouldn't say that I have to do something. They would rather encourage me to, and they left much scope for what I'm interested for. History was not that practical. My mother probably would have preferred me to become a doctor, a physician. My father didn't express any opinion, but of course they didn't have anything against my interest that displayed first in like grammar school and then in my secondary school, and in a sort of love for history, meaning that I wanted to understand what the past is and how people behave and what they thought some time ago, and definitely from the very beginning in the very old days. So meaning that, for instance, antiquity, this classical antiquity was my passion, and there was a passion for Greeks more than for the Romans. So that meant that I preferred the history of ancient Greece. And there was a sort of competition in my secondary school, which is called the Olympics in history. And I was one, not of the winners, but those that were in the group of those that were the best. So they enjoyed my success, and of course I was proud of myself. I decided to go to the university and to join the history department. And at the same time, I had like crystal clear opinion that I have to study also, which is in Poland called classical philology, so basically classics because you can't understand people without knowing their language and their culture in more general way, so meaning going more deeply into it than we do it fleetingly on a normal course. So that's why I started parallelly history and classical philology. I must say that I much more enjoyed classical philology because of reading and because of people, and it was a sort of entity for me. So meaning that both people and what we were doing was not only enjoyable, but it was like enlightening. Yeah, people behaved in a way I understood. They, of course, paid much attention to their studies, but we would also spend much time together, working together and studying together, which is exactly my idea of being among other people.
Could you tell a little bit about the books you read as a child? Did you read those famous myths of ancient Greece?
Yes, of course. I mean, but this was my passion and my reading throughout my childhood. So I was returning to myths, once a month at least, reading, of course, in Polish. Then during my studies, I tried to do something more. We had something like a list of obligatory lectures, but I tried to go beyond it, meaning that, for instance, we had to go through one volume, one book of Herodotus, but instead I started to read it up, and finally I finished. The same with Thucydides and other things. I had a marvelous teacher on poetry, and she would teach me Catullus, and this was extremely enjoyable because she was able to show not only which method it was written in, but also what was the meaning and what was his attitude toward Lesbia. he addressed so many times too. So this was excellent. I don't think that classical philology in Poland is taught in a way that after that you can be quite fluent at everything you do, so both at Latin and Greek. So it took me a lot of time just to master my command, meaning that all the time, and even today, I try to do reading for the sake of knowing what was written, but also for the sake of being better through reading, because I very well remember the ancient proverb nulla dies sine linea. So I try to simply follow this piece of advice.
So by the time you were finishing high school, you already had set your mind that you
Yes,
want
exactly.
to study history. And how did you choose the university? Did you decide to go to University of Lodz because that was the closest? Or?
Yes, exactly. Because I was from Łódź and my family was in Łódź, I was presently and very conveniently settled in here, and university was close to me. And that was why probably many people just decided at the time. For the same reasons, I don't think it's wise from. I mean, it was wise from the perspective I've got today. But anyway, any place you study, you can do something, and you can be better, and you can contribute. I've got no regrets.
I spoke to a researcher from Norway just for the previous podcast who lived in Oslo and decided to go and study in Tromsø, to go away from everything she knew to experience something else. So I was wondering if you had a teenage rebellion.
No. I was a very ruly child. Very, very happy with the life I was living. So I didn't have to. I just wanted to prolong this. And it wasn't a mistake, even if after many years have gone, I look at those days. So this is basically it, and I still try to contribute. So my university to be better, this is my mission as well. I mean, I'm very sorry for this sort of talking, but I'm convinced like that.
It's a valid opinion.
Exactly.
So when you studied here at Łódź, and I think that back in the day it was probably the combined system of bachelor and master set together as it used to be
in
Poland.
One course, simply.
Up until recently. Can you tell a little bit about your university study? How did it go with classical philology? It was the end of the communistic period here in Poland, and could you tell a little bit how the studies were organized? What was interesting? What was perhaps less interesting? And maybe now, also from your perspective as the dean, how much things changed in relation to the experience of a student?
This is a very hard question, because I usually do not think that much about the past. I do not reminisce about what is gone. Because it's gone. If it's gone, it's gone. As far as I remember, it was just a normal, regular course of studies. But as we call it, kierunki, that means both courses, were the same. We had a break after the imposition of martial law.
In December 1982.
Yeah, I do not remember how long it was. Even I do not remember. I'm very sorry. But then we returned, and I just remember I was happy that we returned, although the break was also enjoyable. It was winter, and I could do whatever I wanted. I was preparing for the exam because I knew what would be required from me by the examiner. So I was basically regularly reading for the exam. We had contacts, although you don't remember, but I recall that phones didn't work, but hardly a person had a phone. So it wasn't, So it was like for some time being a sort of disorientation, and then coming back to like normal ways. So we were visiting each other, exchanging informations, reflections, information about what was happening. There was no television, but television at the time wasn't that much of fun. So anyway, it was like that. And then we rejoined. We were spending simply time together, doing what we were supposed to do, and enjoying ourselves. Courses were very similar to the ones we have today, except for the fact that we studied for 5 years for master's degree. And that means that we, I think, had much more time, organized in a better way just to reach the final goal, meaning that you know something from a certain area of knowledge, meaning that you are a philologist or you are a historian, you had much more time just to cover everything, and they required from us everything from antiquity up to the almost the time when I was finishing. I don't remember when I was finishing. Yes, I do remember. It was 1987, and there was an exam in modern history. That meant that we had everything up to the 1987 because it was in the last year. So I had to know something about latest developments as well. So I was observing like television, listening to the radio, and reading whatever was written about this. So basically, when I observe my students nowadays, so they behave in a very similar way, and they treat it in a very similar way. I would say that nothing has changed much.
I would like to correct myself that the martial law was imposed in 1981, not 1982, as I mentioned. But you mentioned that you studied classics, and that was at the Faculty of Philology, but now
yes.
It is actually at the Faculty of History that you can study classical.
I mean,
studies
basically,
nowadays.
it doesn't matter. We had two. What do we call it? We call it faculties. Yeah, classical philology was in the Faculty of Philology, and history was in the Faculty of Philosophy and History, and I was parallelly following both the courses.
And at what point did you decide to focus on history as such?
Because here there was a very special person that like opened my eyes to something that was a bit new. So meaning Byzantine period and Byzantium, saying that it's much different from antiquity. I wouldn't say so nowadays. So basically, because they offered me something like a job and first an interesting subject to research for my master degree. So Emperor Julian the Apostate and his like image of religion, what pagan religion, and the outcome. So the result was satisfactory. They offered me here a job. So that's why I stayed here, but I've never changed, say, my perspective. So this history of religion, in the eyes of the Emperor Julian, was all the time the same craving for, like, knowing what people thought at this very distant time about something. And religion was and is important for me. So basically it was the same, plus I had to study works by Julian. meaning that I had to read the ancient Greek, and it was very much enjoyable.
And at what point you decided that you will continue your career into academia? So when did you actually decide to do a PhD? Because master is 5 years, and a lot of people quit master, well, finish master and then continue into either school or museum or library or government, anywhere else. What made you stay?
Michael, you got a different perspective, I must say. No, at the time when I finished, it was 1987 as far as I remember.
I went to the first grade.
There were not many opportunities, one thing. Academia was thought to be a very honorable way of life that can lead you to something like a sort of high position, at least in the eyes of the other people. And I simply enjoyed it. You know, I would say that each academic is a very egotic person that is concentrated on himself or herself, trying to show up. I was the same. So basically, this is my way, very selfish, to see myself and my place in the society, that finally decided about this. And I enjoyed to some extent, because I had contacts with other people. I could show what I knew, but then with time, I could see that I would, in a way, mold them, meaning that my ideas can be received, and then they can settle in the minds of other people, which gives you something like a enormous power, of molding other people's minds, which is, once again, extremely selfish and egotic, to be in the position and think of oneself just in this way. No, I don't think like that. I've got a certain idea, and I want to instill the idea in the minds of my students, but not for the sake of showing myself off. So it was one. The other one were the requirements. I had to have my PhD in order to stay at the university, because the regulations were very strict. And there were not many universities that would offer for me a placement. So at the time I wasn't that bright, and nowadays I'm not that renowned either. So that means that I stick to something I had, and I stick to something I have, but trying to contribute and enjoying even the limits of reality. I'm not sure whether I can be understood, but
I think it's pretty clear.
This is basically following what opportunities, or taking advantage of opportunities, almost everyone knows, including yourself, as far as I remember, Michael. Yeah?
That's true. So, when you decided that you want to stay at the university and you decided that you will do a PhD, how did you choose your supervisor? Or was it the other way around?
I was chosen by my supervisor. It was Professor Waldemar Ceran, who was a very, renowned personage at the university level. And he was very well known, Poland-wise, so everywhere. And he was one of the few that dealt in almost the same area I was interested in. So literature, antiquity, Byzantium doesn't matter. A man of letters, a man that was very persuasive. They could build images and pictures in the minds of his students. And he had something like a goal. He wanted to establish a sort of Byzantine research or Byzantine studies school at the university. And I was very much willing to join, because I thought I've got something much place for myself, my interests, and my contribution as well.
Nowadays, I read it when I was a student, so some 20 years ago, from my professors when I was thinking about study direction, that you should not choose the Middle Ages, because the Middle Ages has very little job potential. And I wonder what was the case here in Poland.
In Poland, for someone that's interested in the medieval times, not that much, but in antiquity either. So that means that nowadays there are only some centers that give you something like opportunities. Modern history is all the rage. I do not wonder why. Because it's more up to date, more interest, more connected with something what is going on. People tend to like being engaged in what is going on in political factions and political views, so they simply engage themselves in something like what is very close at hand for them. And probably that's why they think it's much more interesting. They can see that people were almost the same in antiquity as well. And that is a very important barrier, so language barrier, because you yourself know very well there are not that many people that can do ancient languages nowadays, and Greek and Latin is like double Dutch, double Chinese or double Hindu to the vast majority, say 99% of society and academics as well.
It reminds me that when I was defending my PhD at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, one of my opponents said that it was the first time in 20 years that a doctor of thesis at the Faculty of Theology has Hebrew in it.
Yeah, but it was a very, 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 say, substantial or very, very, very important compliment that was paid to you.
Oh, I was just lucky that I knew the language, but this is just to exemplify that this is the case indeed.
But you probably, as me, we have a very same opinion, meaning that if you want to do something, you've got quite deeply into it, and you've got to have certain tools in order to do it. And you've got to understand, you as well as myself, we have to understand, and then we can say something about our understanding of what we were reading or studying into. Yeah, am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would like to take you back to the PhD years and the process of being supervised and the process of actually developing as a researcher during your PhD years. Do you remember how many years it took you to finish?
I think 7 or 8. I think 7 years, because I had to work at the same time. I had a large number of classes to run. And that meant that I had to prepare myself. Courses were changing, so subjects were changing, people were changing. So, like the majority of my time, I was spending just doing my classing and preparing myself for the classes. Plus, it was very hard just to get literature too. And plus, you must remember that, of course, when you finish classical philology, you know something about Greek, but you don't know everything about the Greek, and definitely not enough just to do whatever you like to do with ancient sources.
So, what was your relationship with your supervisor? Can you tell a little bit how did it work? Because nowadays a PhD student is being supervised. At least I was meeting my supervisor once a month. We would be discussing my work. I had to write actually from the start. In the Netherlands, the system was that the PhD student should be writing all the time from his first day, practically. And I found it very useful system because after 4 years, luckily I did not have to teach that much. I taught a little bit. But after 4 years, I had the book ready, and eventually that book was published by by a publisher, and I defended a book. It was at the moment, at the time it was defended, it was not yet published. How did it work here?
You must remember that I was employed at the department of the chair, as we call it. We used to call it. In those days let me recall, ancient and Byzantine history, and that my supervisor was at the same time my boss. And he was an almighty figure that could do anything about myself, my life, my study, my teaching, whatever. That means that we had contacts at least 4 times a week, sometimes 4 hours. Each week there was a seminar for the students in which I had to participate as well. I had to read all the works by the students, analyze them, and then pronounce my opinion, my critique. Then at least 6 classes a week. And then usually a report once a month, sometimes once at 2 months, on my on my progress, sending me to libraries to other cities. It wasn't a time where you could get something on the internet, or which you could get by interlibrary exchange or something like that, so it was very hard. So most of our time was like getting a book, and then once I found it, just reading it up within 2 weeks. I was allowed to keep it on my desk. So it was very hard. He was a very, open-minded on one way, but on the other hand, very, very strict person. So he thought he would intervene in any aspect of my life, my job, my behavior, my teaching, which was, for me, and I'm quite independent, although I'm a very ruly person, I'm a law-abiding citizen. It was extremely hard, because I thought I had to do what he wants. And I did it. I thought that it had to be like this.
And did you agree with what he was thinking, or not necessarily?
Oh, he was,
Internally.
an excellent teacher, an excellent academic, and he was taught the same way she was teaching me. So I, in a way, complied too, but inside, I didn't understand him. It was basically just the other way in my family, yeah? And I had to comply, and I complied. I always loved him, in a way. It was much a love and hate relationship. I do appreciate him, and I cherish him. I've done a lot, and what I'm doing always, with something like him, his person, his ideas in my mind. However, of course, I've won my independence. I'm not doing the same things he wanted. But at the end of his career here, I convinced him that I am supposed to go my own way, and I can do not only subjects that he likes, but also something that really interests me, myself.
And he agreed.
Pardon?
And he agreed.
Yes, he agreed, because what was charming, especially from my today's point of view, about my former boss, about Professor Waldemar Ceran, is that he was developing all the time, up to the very end of his life. And from a very strict person, he turned into a person that could have very, very wide horizons, not only like academia-like, but also people-like, people-wise. So meaning that he could understand, and he could understand the fact that other people are not exactly the same as he was. And he allowed me to do whatever I wanted, and he approved of it. It's not only that he allowed, it was really a breakthrough for him, not that much for myself. But then he approved of, and he was interested in, and he would say that it opened his mind as well. So it was mutual. It was extremely enjoyable that you could influence your own strict boss and see him changing. Yeah?
I wanted to ask you one more thing about the university and your career.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the PhD, usually there is a choice again. So there's one choice when you finish school, whether to study at all, and if to study, then what and where. And when you finish your PhD...
In your word, Michael, in your word, my world was absolutely different. I had a job here, and there were regulations, and once again I had to comply.
So that's my question, exactly. Mm-hmm. So you were determined already from the start of the PhD that you are going to continue.
Yes, exactly. Because I enjoyed the job. I enjoyed the students. I enjoyed what I was doing. And exactly, for some time I decided to work parallelly at the different part of the university. The world was changing. They opened something, they set up something that was called Polish American Management Center. And they were interested in something they called at the time distance learning. And I was employed there as a sort of a man for creating ideas there. And I was doing it, and I was enjoying. I had an opportunity to work with people from the States. Even visited twice the United States of America. Much more doing something like not history, but something like, say, management. Trying to understand other people, like management-wise, yeah. And I would say I profited enormously from something absolutely different, and I learned knowledge. I acquired some knowledge. I learned some skills that I could combine with what at the time I had already had, and that meant that, of course, after 2 years I quit. I had to decide, and I decided just for the benefit of history. And from that time I was and I am deeply convinced that I was and I'm doing something that not only I chose, but this is the right way. I'm not sure whether I've made myself understood, Michael.
I think it was pretty clear, at least to me. And that brings me to my next question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you've been twice to the States. Did you have other opportunities to stay abroad, to learn English? Where did you learn English?
Here in Poland, basically during my service, because I had to go to the army. It was obligatory, and I stayed there for 10 months. And it was an enormously enjoyable time when I had so much free scope for developing myself. It was the time of my, say, very, very active study into English. And I could see myself progressing. It was, excellent time. Excellent time.
How old were you?
How old I was at the time? 28.
So you were doing the service pretty late.
No, I had basically English in my secondary school. Before that, I also was and had some courses. But was a child, I didn't see much what reason in learning something. There was no application for whatsoever. So I didn't pay much time and attention. I did it for my parents and for the sake of thinking that this is basically right. So I knew something, yeah. I mean, I don't know English, yes. I can be communicative on a certain level, but that's all basically, yeah. So this is like that. So, but anyway, at the time, and then I used to attend many courses of different sort. Actually, 4 years ago, I had to quit for my duties at the department only because of that. Yeah, I can't combine all the time in order to survive. So that means that, unfortunately, I've got a 4 year break. Yes, from English, but definitely once I quit. So that means that in 2 years' time, I rejoin courses in English because this is fun. Basically, I feel that I can develop myself. Yeah, widen my horizons. Say, be better. Say something that's more meaningful. In a better way, communicate with others. So this is some time I'm. Awaiting impatiently, I would say. But there was also a period when I won something that is a Soros scholarship. And I was in England for 9 months. A very lonely time at Oxford University, which is a beautiful placement in Keble College, which you might know, and many of the people know. This is a so-called Russia of Bacon. For its like appearance, meaning that you've got layers of white limestone, as far as I remember, and bricks, and it reminds you of a Russia of Bacon, just in front of the University Museum and close to the park, very close to St. John's, and there was a huge difference between those posh people from St. John's and those from Keble. But it was a fantastic time on one hand, because I could confront myself to the reality that was absolutely different. It was 1991 or 2, I don't remember either, even, yeah? I told you, I do not pay much attention to the past. Very enjoyable time. But it was a time of loneliness, being, I was very, very strictly or very closely connected with my parents and with my family. So I was studying, and that studying for the sake of studying, without applications and without family, it is an extremely hard time for a person like myself. So very enjoyable, but. And, I was always a person from the distant, far-off communist country. They were doing some service to me. It was okay. I liked it. But then I was extremely happy when I left for Poland.
Well, I've been to Oxford several times myself, and I found it a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And very enjoyable, especially all the traditions, the high table, the ceremonies.
Port at the end of the meal.
Yeah, port. Yeah. Not necessarily port. But also the various traditions that we had some in Groningen, which was an old university. I think Łódź is only 70 years old, the University of Łódź.
I think so, yeah. You're right. 1946 when it was established. We are not very good at mathematics.
Numbers, no, unfortunately not. As we are reaching almost the final minutes of our talk, I wanted to ask you, now if you're looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently in relation to your career? Something that perhaps younger scholars or maybe students who listen to us, or even high school pupils who might come across this podcast could also learn from?
This is very hard for me, just to reflect on my past and on changing my career, because there was definitely some time when I made my choices. and I stick to them. I know that I could have done something differently, but this is my knowledge, but I don't think about this. I live for today. I try as hard as it is only possible. I think that history gives you an enormous opportunity to be wiser for yourself. Really, this is magistra for, or could be a teacher for us. Usually we don't pay attention to the lessons. Now I'm quite comfortable, although I don't think for my duties that I'm doing, my administrative duties, that I do enough of my things. Just before your arrival, I was able for 15 minutes just to open up my computer and read 3 chapters of Peridiaites, the first one. And it was the only 15 minutes I was able to do today. And I would like to have much more time for something that really enjoys me and about which I think that it can contribute to my personal development. But I made my choice. I have to devote my time to the people, to management, and it's not something that I hate, that I loathe. I feel that I can contribute. And I sometimes feel that people can support me and understand me. And this is a source of satisfaction that's basically the most important you can get in your life, that you know that your life is with a purpose and for a purpose, and that other people can at least understand, and sometimes some people even support your cause. So this is something that in a normal real life doesn't happen very often. And basically I'm a very extremely maximum lucky person that I live my life today as it is. I'm not sure whether I've been clear about what I was saying. I think that I live a good life and I do my duties in the best possible way. I do whatever I can, and basically this is enough. I can't expect anything more of myself, and other people cannot expect any more from me. Basically it.
Thank you very much for this conversation.
It was a pleasure. It was an honor.
Thank you.